But David Rossi come to me only recently with a sad story. Didn't pay attention, I didn't want to hear, because I done and I'm finding me own affair. But when he tell me the doctor gone back in power on the 5th of October, in the grave I started to shiver. But when he tell me Mr. Desmond agreed to all of the doctor plan, so I come tonight to tell Desmond where you wrong. Look, I hear you fight the election as a clean and decent man. Yes, you're wrong. Yes, you're wrong. And the Jacob left the commission to the college coyote plan. Yes, you're wrong. Yes, you're wrong. But as president of the land, you failed to set up a battle plan. That is why you can't. Yes, you can't. Want to be a veteran in politics, you gotta be smart and have plenty tricks. Never put all your confidence in your fellow man, especially when you're fighting an election. I hear they say that the doctor tell you to bring up Zorba, and so from America you bring Mr. Carter. But listen, brother David, you should have never ever agree. You could have come and let me advise you properly. The observers from overseas, you bring to scrutinize Guyanese. They say you're wrong. They say you're wrong. Anyway, they send Mr. Carter, the opposition take over. They say you're wrong. They say you're wrong. But as president of the land, you fail to set up a battle plan. That is why you can't. Yes, you can't. There we go. Years, you know I used to sanction to everyone throughout the Caribbean. If a leader wants to stay in position, he must never think for the free and fair election. We know that the doctor wanted to get in power with everything in his favor, confusing the leader election. They went presidency. Instead of voting for PNC, he's so confused that he voted for the PPP. I heard the ballot had to be counting at the place of poll in the evening. That's you're wrong. That's you're wrong. On the night before the election, the list was still in confusion. That's you're wrong. That's you're wrong. But as president of the land, you failed to set up a battle plan. That is why you can't. That's why you can't. Alive? That's why you're wrong. But as president of the land, you failed to set up a battle plan. That is why you can't. That's why you can't. want to be a veteran in politics, you gotta be smart and have plenty tricks. Never put all your confidence in your fellow man, especially when you're fighting an election. I hear they say that the doctor tell you to bring up Zova, and so from America you bring Mr. Carter. But listen, brother David, you should have never ever agree. You could have come and let me advise you properly. The observers from overseas, you bring to scrutinize Guyanese. They say you're wrong. They say you're wrong. Anywhere they send Mr. Carter, the opposition take over. They say you're wrong. They say you're wrong. But as president of the land, you fail to shut up about the plan. That is why you can't. They say you can't. There we go. So many years, you know, I used to sanction to everyone throughout the Caribbean. If a leader wants to stay in position, he must never think for the free and fair election. We know that the doctor wanted to get in power, make everything in favor, confusing the leader election. They went president instead of voting for PNC. He so confused that he voted for the PDP. I heard the ballot had to be counting at the place of poll in the evening. Say you're wrong. Say you're wrong. On the night before the election, the list was still in confusion. Say you're wrong. Say you're wrong. But as president, say you're wrong. And the Jacob left the commission to the Khalid Coyote plan. Say you're wrong. Say you're wrong. But as president of the land, you failed to set up a battle plan. That is why you can't. Say you can't. Want to be a veteran in politics, you gotta be smart and have plenty tricks. Never put all your confidence in your fellow man, especially when you're fighting an election. I hear they say that the doctor tell you to bring up Zova, and so from America you bring Mr. Carter. But listen, brother David, you should have never ever agree. You could have come and let me advise you properly. The observers from overseas, you bring to scrutinize Guyanese. They say you're wrong. They say you're wrong. Anywhere they send Mr. Carter, the opposition take over. They say you're wrong. They say you're wrong. But as president of the land, you fail to shut up about the plan. That is why you can't. Yes, you can't. There we go. the years you know I used to sanction to everyone throughout the CARICOM. If a leader wants to stay in position, he must never think of a free and fair election. We know that the doctor wanted to get in power, did everything in favor, confusing the leader election. They went presidency instead of voting for PNC. He so confused that he voted for the PPP. I heard the ballot has to be counting at the place of poll in the evening. Jesse, you're wrong. Jesse, you're wrong. On the night before the election, the list was still in confusion. Jesse, you're wrong. Jesse, you're wrong. But I'm president of the land. You say the shut up about the plan. That is why you're gone. Jesse, you're gone. Alive? Admire Dr. for all his patience, grit and determination. For 28 long years he waited patiently to rise again and defeat the PNC. He captured presidency, applied the pressure on heat, embarrassed the PNC, then demolished presidency. If only now that he know he failed from all them chances he take. Well, it's now that he get to learn from your own mistake. Teddy is president of the land. No use you fret and frown. Jesse, you're wrong. Jesse, you're wrong. The man is a true born politician. That is why he win the election. Jesse, you're wrong. Jesse, you're wrong. But as former president of the land, I say let the function and carry on. Jesse, a point back to the mausoleum. You're wrong.
Oh, yes. Well. Oh, good evening and welcome. Welcome to Politics 101. It's Tuesday evening, and I have Honorable Roysdale Ford who's going to join me in a minute or so. Would like to welcome you. Uh, the voice, the presence of the late, great, mighty rebel, one of the greatest Calypsonians to come out of Guyana and the Caribbean, doing one of the great calypsos of our time. Desi, you're wrong. Desi, you're wrong. Um, you know, a comrade of mine, after the first time I played that calypso on this program, a comrade of mine accused me of promoting rigging. What do they know of calypso? Who only calypso knows? I'm going to spend some time explaining that calypso. That calypso is pregnant with serious questions, questions of elections, ethnicity, electoral integrity, the role of foreign players. It's one of the great calypsos, and you have to understand the art of calypso to understand the calypsonian and what he or she does. And They're talking about rigged election, and I am willing to join that conversation. And I started last night, and I will have a lot to say about rigged election. But Desi, you're wrong. One of the great calypsos of our time, the mighty rebel, from the West Bank, Sisters Village. Know his family well. Did some work over there a few years ago. His dear wife, Teacher Juliet, and his daughter is also keeping the flag flying. Welcome to all of you. Those of you joining us from Guyana, welcome. You're joining us from Buxton. My friend Orin Newton is joining in there. I see Cousin Beryl of Buxton, from Buxton. Beryl James, good evening to you, sister, and all the sisters and brothers who are joining us tonight. Last night, of course, we had a ball. We ran for 2 hours. We were half an hour late, but we ran for 2 hours. We had a big cast, and we were talking about all things related to the teacher strike and other development. The strike is in its 4th week. Today is 5 and 5:10 and 5:15. It's 17 days today, and the teachers are out there. As I have said on this program, there is the text and there is the subtext. There's the text and there's the subtext. The teachers are out there taking industrial action, and they have a right to decide how, when, and how long they're going to be out there. That's a matter for them and their union. The rest of us, we are not union bosses. The rest of us have to support. If we are in agreement with the teachers, we have to support them. Some of us have to give meaning to what they're doing, put it in its larger historical context, but we cannot be the union bosses. If the teacher says bread and butter, then it's bread and butter. The rest of us will put it in its larger political context. The teachers say it's not political. They have a right to determine what it is from their standpoint. The rest of us, and I'm calling on you all, I'm calling on our supporters, try not to be the union bosses. Let the union bosses execute the strike. The strike is a strike about bread and butter, about bread and justice. It's about teachers being rolled over by an uncaring government. And the government that is prepared to fight the teachers down. And the teachers are fighting back. They're fighting back. And I'm telling you, it is a tremendous fight. To carry out a strike for 17 days in contemporary Guyana is a tremendous undertaking. It's an Herculean task. It is no easy task. I've said on this program many times before, sometimes we don't understand the moment of history that we're in. Everything changed in Guyana after 2020. Everything, including protests, including strikes, including everything. And sometimes we judge ourselves pre-2020 and not post-2020. And to conduct a strike of that nature, to get the kind of support the teachers have been able to get for the last 3.5 weeks, in the context, is tremendous. There were times when striking was different. Today, it's not easy. And I hear all the time, we call for this to happen, that to happen, boots on the ground, blah, blah, blah. The opposition should do this. The opposition leader should do that. This to do that, blah, 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 blah. And that's good. But we have to have an appreciation of the times we are living in. All the governments before, all of them, at some point they came to the table. This government is determined not to go to the table. That is the massive difference between now and before now. This time a long time, this time a long time, this not day before time. We're in new times, different times. This government was prepared to go and to thief the teachers' money under the guise of deducting their payment if they didn't go to work. The teachers went to court. We are in new times. And if there's one thing I want all you to remember me and this time is my plea to understand the moment that you're in. You can't make sense if you don't understand what you're dealing with. And I'm not saying what I'm saying to frighten anybody or to discourage anybody. I am stating this is not the 1970s, not the 1980s, not the 1990s. This is 2024 in a place called Guyana and everything that comes with 2024 Guyana. Good evening to all of you. One of the things about 2024 is that 2004, 2014, 1994, we did not have Politics 101, where over 1,200 people on a Tuesday night are tuning in to hear the Shadow Attorney General. We didn't have this in 2014. We didn't have this in 2004. We have it now. And when you all leave here, you all gone to Cheryl Duncan. And then when you all leave Cheryl, you all gone to Mark. And in the morning early, you get Kedaki, and throughout the day, they talk about cable TV. I was around when cable TV first came on the scene. 24 hours TV, 24 hours news, breaking news. We have that now in the form of what they're calling social media influencers and all of that. Our Guyana has changed, comrades. And your analysis must take that change into consideration. All right, let's go. I'm ready to bring in Honorable Roysdale Ford. No introduction to you. No introduction. He's been here many times and he's been round and about. Roysdale, good evening, my brother.
Hi, good evening, Doc. Good evening to the audience.
And I am sure, Roysdale, that you have not fallen into the trap to believe that Guyana today is what it used to be 10 years ago, 20 years ago. I am sure that you have made that connection that today we are in a changed Guyana, and in many regards, it calls for an adjustment to the way in which we see Guyana, we analyze Guyana, and our expectations are built. Talk to me.
Oh, I definitely agree with you, Doc. I believe that since March 2020, we have definitely entered a new Guyana. I believe that preceding 2020, the discovery of oil and what it portends for this population and the world at large, we saw the early signs of the new Guyana being manifested. I had the opportunity about 2 weeks ago to speak to some comrades in Linden, and that what you were actually saying was what was the substance of what I was saying, that we are in a new time. It is a new Guyana. There are new dynamics, there are new opportunities, and there are new forms of oppression that will be unleashed on the Guyanese population. And I was exhorting my members of my party for us to reflect and advance new ways and creative ways to deal with old problems and additional problems, which will all manifest themselves in a new context. So I believe that it is very important that we use this medium, your shows, other shows, to articulate and educate our members, our supporters, and the citizens at large as to the impact of what is happening on their lives now, the historical circumstances that we're in, and what is likely to evolve in the future if we don't pull ourselves together at this stage.
And Roysdale, I mean, all of us have had to undergo change. All of us have had to make adjustments to the way we see politics. We look at politics. We advance ideas. And I have been following you very closely over the last 3 years. And I know that you have grappled with a lot of the big issues of our time and start to make sense of it, starting with your comfort zone, your base as a legal practitioner, as a legal scholar, but using that base to try to make sense of what is happening around us. And I want to start by talking to you about the teacher strike. What for you, after 3.5 weeks, are some lessons we are learning from this teacher strike? It's the first major strike in post-March 2020 Guyana. What are we learning from this teacher strike?
Well, Doc, I believe that one of the significant things that, as a population, a Guyanese population in the country and in the diaspora, that we would have learned is that we still have the ability to stand up and fight. And I believe that that is a very important manifestation and occurrence, because you would hear the cries of the fact that we have given up, we have abandoned the ability to fight. And I believe that the teachers must be commended for this sterling position that they have adopted. We have the raging debate as to whether the strike is political, whether it is bread and butter. I believe that it is irrelevant for politicians to really try to put a label on the strike. I have my personal views, which I don't think is necessary and would advance the cause, but I believe what is ultimately important is that this is a social and economic issue. It's a bread and butter issue. It deals with the condition of the teachers, the conditions under which they work, the conditions under which they earn, and the ability, which is impacted obviously by what they earn, in relation to take care of themselves and their family. So I believe that this is a very personal issue. I believe what we would have learned also, Doc, is the government's ability in the new economic circumstances, in a society in which there is wealth, excessive amounts of wealth. We have learned again of the PPP's determination to fracture the society according to race and according to social economic circumstances. I believe that this is equally tragic, if not the greatest negative takeaway from the strike and the need and the urgency of the teachers to strike. Because when it is analyzed, there's no need for the teachers to strike. It is not as if it was the pre-2020 Guyana, in which there were obviously limited resources to be put into salaries and wages to improve the economic conditions for teachers and similar public servants. But we're in a new Guyana, where we have an abundance of wealth. And so it comes down, Doc, to something that we would have discussed some time ago, which is the economic circumstances, which is reflected in the governance system, in the Constitution as a whole. So you have a system where a majoritarian government, in government, by a majority of one seat, who's making decisions impacting the lives of a significant number of people in a purely majoritarian way. We're dealing here with the economic inequalities that exist in the system, which flows directly from the legal and constitutional arrangements that we have in place. I believe that this is an opportunity for the Guyanese people to review what is happening. We start in a new process of constitutional reform, and it's an opportunity to review for electoral purposes of making sound and wise decisions that the PPP is not capable of delivering the sort of growth that we need, growth in our homes and our families, but we could see growth taking place in terms of economic numbers. We know the 10th largest growing economy, the fastest growing economy. Those things mean nothing, and there's a significant reality gap and circumstance gap between what those numbers indicate and what is the quality of life that takes place in the homes and in the communities, and the raging poverty that continues to plague the society.
Uh, Honorable Roysdale Ford, Attorney General, Shadow Attorney General in the National Assembly, member of the People's National Congress, Senior Counsel, here with us tonight, sharing his perspective and doing what we must do, what we have to continue to do to help to explain and to make sense of what's happening. Roysdale, let me take you right away to the constitutional law because you introduced it. There's a letter in this morning's paper by Henry Jeffrey. I don't know if you read it. It was in a Kaito News. And he raises the question of constitutional reform regarding industrial relations. There are things that we accept. We accept that trade unions have a right to strike. We accept that collective bargaining is sacrosanct. We accept that employers and the unions would sit down and would come to an amicable agreement whenever there is conflict. We accept that there is a role for the Department of Labor, the Ministry of Labor. These things are what you all lawyers will call settled law, settled in the law. But when we look at the way in which the PPP is prepared to violate the law, the way in which they threaten to deduct teachers' money, the way in which they unilaterally decided check-off system, they're going to stop it. The teachers, of course, had to go to court. And I think what Jeffrey's raising is that some of these things that we take for granted in a normal, open, democratic society, given what we are dealing with in Guyana, we no longer can depend on this government to follow the spirit of the law. Now, in some respects, the government go by the letter of the law, and in that regard, they're not breaking the law. But you know very well, Roysdale, more than I do, that law is both letter and spirit. And given the fact that this government is prepared to break the letter and the spirit of the law, is there not time, has it not reached the time that as we look to constitutional reform, that we have to take the labor, the industrial relations, climate, the industrial relations laws into consideration, and to try to get into a new constitution, safeguards for workers, that there is a way for our government to be compelled to safeguard the rights of workers and not to trample on them. What says you?
Certainly, Doc. You know, we continue to engage in constitutional reform in Guyana, but I think we do so from a very strange premise. We each time make the assumption that the two political parties will approach these issues with a certain paradigm, certain orientation. And I believe that in practice, particularly the PPP as a political party, would have demonstrated consistently their inability or the pure unwillingness and contempt for the principles that rest in the Constitution as the building blocks. In reviewing our constitutional system and what we would have put in place in terms of safeguards for labor, I believe that we have outgrown them by our behavior. We have outgrown them by our behavior. In a normal, sensible, reasonable republic, what we have in the Constitution would have been more than sufficient. There are countries with significantly less safeguards and provision in relation to industrial relation matters, but they are functioning well because there is a long and established respect for labor. There's a tradition of how we would approach these issues, and therefore a culture, a convention would arise and be supporting the law. In Guyana, it is the reverse. The law has become very sterilized, and the forms in which we approach these issues and the conventions that we have been developing over time run counter to the letter and spirit of the law and to the rights which should exist in practice and not simply on paper in relation to what happens. So, Doc, I'll point out a number of instances where we are really behind um, the ball at this stage, having regard to what the PPP is doing. And I want to start first by the international law and international conventions that govern strikes and labor matters. In our constitution, in the last revision, we decided as a nation that we will include certain international conventions. But significantly, Doc, none of the international conventions included in the second or fourth schedule to the Constitution, which are to be given effect to in the Constitution by the courts, the government, etc., includes the International Labour Organization conventions. So that is a complete gap which exists in the current legal system. So whilst Article 154A of the Constitution requires the court to pay attention to international conventions, a very important element of labor and labor's conventions and the respect for international human rights labor law has been excluded and not included at all. Now, Guyana were being signatories to these conventions, but because of the dual system, they are not necessarily part of the operative domestic law.
Mm-hmm.
So it just simply exists there, and you sign these conventions, and you're left languishing. But in terms of a practical implementation and new and important provisions to secure labor, you're left out there meaningless. So I would articulate, Doc, that as one of the first things that we should do in establishing a new and improved and revised labor arrangement, which would be nestled in the Constitution, is to expand those provisions to include the labor conventions, to include the determinations made by judicial tribunals under the ILO, to give effect to labor and to labor rights. So that is at the international level. Now, Doc, when you compare the more advanced constitutions, which would have evolved over the last 20 years, we missed the ball again in failing to put in place the sort of provisions that are really important for labor. We have made some considerable journey from where we were. We have put new provisions which seek to strengthen your participation in trade unions. We've put provisions which deal with collective bargaining. Well, really and truly, the Constitution says collective arguments, and that was a typo. So I actually went to check to see what is the law when it was passed, and interestingly, it says collective agreements.
Okay.
So we have done those things. We have put in it in a strange sort of structured way a right to strike, but there's much more, Doc, which has been left out. And I want to point out what I believe should be going. We could look at the Constitution of Kenya and South Africa. And I believe that as we engage in this process of constitutional reform, there is no constitution in the world at this time which is filled with so much potential to provide us with a pathway and that we should copy other than the Republic of Kenya.
Mm-hmm.
Their constitution is the most advanced constitution. It is most advanced in terms of dealing with the ethnic or tribal issues which we have manifested here as ethnic issues, and how the country has devolved power to the lower levels, to states, to provinces as they are, counties as they're called, and the legislature and the independents that govern them. The right of those states or counties as they exist under Kenya, the Kenyan constitution, to have drawings and compulsory drawings on the state resources. So a lot of these issues, Doc, a lot of these issues which plague the society stem not only from the culture that currently would have evolved, but the inability of the state and the people of the country to come up with mechanisms to address them. And we continue to engage in this sort of piecemeal approach where we don't really address the issues. So, Doc, in Kenya, Article 41 of their constitution provides for an entitlement of labor to fair labor practices. I don't believe that I need to dilate much on that. You would have seen what has been happening by the government in relation to the teachers' strike, and all those would be specific constitutional rights which would constitute a block on the government's behavior. There's a right in their constitution in Article 41 for a right to fair remuneration, Doc. Fair remuneration set out in the constitution. And the right for reasonable working conditions. Those are three significant provisions which exist in the Constitution of Kenya. And the fourth one that I believe is very important is that by Article 162 of the Kenyan Constitution, Parliament is mandated to enact law that would establish a court, an industrial relations court, that has the same status, privileges, and ranking as the High Court or the Supreme Court of Kenya. The reason why that is important, Doc, is because I believe that that would have established both at the judicial level an efficient means of processing and determining labor rights, not having it clogged up in the general melee of constitutional and civil matters. And it is important to maintain the stability of the society by allowing labor, and in instances employers, to go to a judicial tribunal and to have those issues resolved quickly and effectively. So those are significant things that would have happened in the Kenyan Constitution, which I believe are important. Could I continue, Doc?
Yes. Go right ahead. We're in
Doc,
school.
No, Doc, one of the other areas which I believe that we have a problem with, and it is the core issue in the teachers' problem, is the failure of the government to act in good faith. And what this actually means and how it impacts on the entire process of collective bargaining. Now, interestingly, Doc, our Constitution says, when properly read and you take out the typographical error or typo error that took place, it really confers a right to collective agreements. And it is fair to articulate that you can't arrive at a collective agreement unless you're allowed to engage in a process of collective bargaining. So it is a whole system that is put in place. The Trade Union Recognition Act went a bit further to say, listen, when a union would have become the recognized union and issued a certificate of recognition, the employer, including the state and the government of Guyana, is bound to treat with that union and to act in good faith. Now, Doc, what would have happened over the past 3 years? And I want us to examine that because it goes to the malafiders of this government and the contempt for the Constitution and the disregard for the working people of Guyana. You see, we live in an ethnic society, Doc. So the government could go out there and throw some money in our ethnic context to the sugar workers who are predominantly East Indian. And then they would try to retain or not give resources to workers who are predominantly African. But now let us come back and examine all that is happening here, Doc. In 2020, I believe, sometime around there, the teachers' union engaged the government by writing to them to point out what are their concerns and what they would like to have dealt with and addressed in the process of collective bargaining. There were some initial meetings. Nothing came of that process. The government decided that they will, in their own manner, adopt, change, reflect, and implement what they perceive to be some of the requests or the demand of the teachers. That is not collective bargaining. The government cannot unilaterally just receive the communication from the teachers' union, decided they will change it up and give it out, and they want to consider that collective bargaining. That is the first fundamental problem with the system. And then what happened, Doc? Hello?
Yeah, you go ahead. Go ahead, Roysdale. I'm here.
And then what happened, Doc? The government, in relation to a request by the teachers' union to establish a 3-year agreement, we are now 2024, in pure acts of bad faith, strung the teachers out for an entire period of 3 years without implementing, in the context of a collective bargaining system, any of the requests of the teachers. So the first step would be the bilateral arrangements. And many months ago, many years ago, it is clear to all to see that there be no meaningful advancement on resolution of any industrial issues between the teachers and the government at that stage. Now you're supposed to move to the next stage of conciliation. And under the Labor Act, the minister or the chief labor officer is entitled and empowered to intervene to resolve those issues. And if after conciliation, there's still a gap, there's no meaningful advancement towards the resolution, under the law, the process is arbitration. Now, we've had a process now where the teachers felt that after 3 to 4 years, and a consistent refusal by the government to act in bad faith, to meet with them and to engage in the process of collective bargaining, that they will write an ask for conciliation. That was refused and rejected by the minister or the chief labor officer. In relation to the resolution of the process by arbitration, the same negativity ensued from those two government officials. The point that I'm making, Doc, is that part of the collective labor process, starting from the point of bilateral communication all the way to arbitration, is supposed to operate in a manner to prevent industrial responses by the teachers in terms of a strike. But what has happened is that the government has strung the teachers' union out, or attempted to do so. They have refused, point blank refused, to engage in the other processes of conciliation and arbitration, which is part of the dispute resolution process in relation to the concerns raised by the teachers. So the government would have rejected those elements of the entire collective labor process. So that is why we're back at this stage, in which the government feels compelled that after stringing the teachers out, acting in that manner, and not being compelled sufficiently under the Constitution in terms of what should be there, and not willing to act in a certain manner that would be conducive to the resolution of labor issues. That is why we've ended up at this problem. The reason why we went through that long sort of analysis, Doc, because I want the population to understand that strikes don't happen. Strikes are responses.
Yes.
Strikes are responses to failures and breakdown in the usual process, which is supposed to be the dispute. We meet, and as part of that process, we fail, we move to this stage, and an arbitration takes place, and both sides licks their wounds and go back to work. So a strike and the occurrence of the strike, having regard to the legal system as a whole, even though deficient it is, supposed to be an aberration. Now, Doc, the government of Guyana, under the Labor Act, has a separate responsibility. The minister and the chief labor officer have a separate responsibility where they're supposed to act in the interest of the public and in the interest of having a calm and placid industrial climate in the country, industrial relations climate. And I wanted to point out clearly from what I've said before, Doc, there is a problem, I believe, in allowing the legislation to be so structured where the sitting minister of labor, who is part of cabinet, whose subordinate is the chief labor officer, they cannot, in my opinion, act in a fair and impartial manner when the government is involved. You see, that these legislation that we would have implemented here would have originated from a certain culture. And this government is clearly against that sort of culture. They're not prepared to act in accordance with the Constitution, the laws, and the spirit and principles that underpin them.
Honorable Roysdale, are you still there with us?
Yes, I'm here, though.
Yes, Honorable Roysdale Ford there, laying it out for us. And I think what Mr. Ford is saying here tonight is very, very, very important. We had here last week that discussion between Honorable Amanzo Walton Desir and Dr. Henry Jeffrey on constitutional reform. And as you remember, Amanda was advancing the argument that, look, nothing is wrong with the constitution we have, but it's the people who are in power. And of course, Jeffrey argued that it is precisely because we have bad people in power that there is need for constitutional reform, that constitutional reform really targets those openings for bad people to act in bad faith. And so thanks to our counselor tonight for really laying out to us the gaps in the Constitution as it relates to labor laws, and not just labor laws, but the protection of the rights of workers. And, in law, they're what we call implied and inherent powers. But there's also what we call express powers, Roysdale. And in societies like ours, it seems to me that we have to move more and more towards express powers, because implied and inherent powers assume that you have leaders who are acting in good faith. You have a political tradition that bars against leaders acting in bad faith. And so that we have to move more and more towards enumerated powers. Talk to us.
I definitely agree with that, Doc. I believe that you look to see how the government is functioning and its continuous evolution. I believe the fact that we now are a wealthy country, oil economy, I believe that is fueling the government's contempt for workers' rights in a manner that we have never seen it before, even by the PPP. We know that the government has demonstrated a sort of consistency, though, I wish to point out, in relation to how they treat with labor and a particular type of labor, a particular source of labor. And we saw that from the response to the Guyana Public Service Union. I believe that now they have decided that this is the time when they must now deal with the Guyana Teachers Union. But Doc, I believe that somehow, whilst the teachers are standing up and fighting, I believe that when the history of this period is written, unfortunately, the big losers will be the Guyanese population and those of us who reside here at this stage. Because I don't see a sufficient civil society condemnation in relation to what is happening in this country. I don't see a sufficient condemnation from parents. From parents. These are the teachers of your children. And I don't see that sort of sufficient condemnation coming out. I don't see it from the churches. I don't see it from other unions, because the union as a whole, they have been divided along, I believe, political or / ethnic lines. So I believe what I'm speaking about, Doc, is the failure of solidarity. The failure of solidarity, both at the labor level and at the community level, to appreciate what is happening. And Doc, we somehow don't really appreciate that every time labor is decimated, or an element of labor is decimated, that we are as a whole, losing significant rights. You see, Doc, rights are not something that you could always measure, right? You can't like hold up a ruler and say we have 10 and 15. But over a period of time, by erosion, by accretion, and by surrender, your rights remain what it exists on paper, but in practice, you suddenly start feeling and seeing that you're living in a very illiberal, undemocratic society. And I believe that is what is happening here. This is a watershed moment for what would have happened. I commend Darren Wade for the filing of this action. I believe he's a young lawyer and he has done significantly important and legal work that will stand the test of time when the annals of history in relation to industrial relations would be resolved. The Guyana Teachers Union would stand also as a beacon of standing up for their workers, their teachers, and I believe by extension the nation as a whole. The Guyana Trades Union Congress, I believe, um, will be, through me, will be applying to the court to make some sort of intervention in this process. It behoves them as the umbrella body to be involved in these issues. Could I continue, Doc?
Yes, 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 yes. That's news.
No,
You were
Doc, no,
giving
Doc,
us news there. Yes.
Doc, one of the important um, considerations that I saw emerging from the conversation, the arguments which took place before the judge, is that Anil Nandalal, the Attorney General, is arguing that there's no work if there's no pay. There's no work and there's no pay.
Yeah.
But Doc, I would want to consider that very irrelevant to the issues that we have here.
Mm-hmm. Talk to us.
They're very relevant. And I don't want to get into the legal issues and the heaviness of it, but in a very simple way, Doc, there must be some balance in the society. And in a society where the government is running amok, where labor is not standing in solidarity, it comes down to the people and it comes down to the courts. Now, Doc, imagine, let's just examine the proposition that Nandalal is articulating. No work, no pay. It sounds sensible. If you don't work, you don't get paid. We can't inherently reject that proposition, but let us analyze it in the context of what is happening here. Because I'm not articulating a proposition, because you know they're dotish like that, Doc, that Ford
Yes.
saying that you must stay home and be paid. These are not people who want to stay home and be paid, Doc. This is a situation, these are workers
Yes.
who have decided that they would strike because of the government's demonstration of bad faith at the negotiation stage and the continuous attempt to treat them in a manner that is completely contemptuous. So Doc, I want us to analyze this no work, no pay thing in that context.
Yeah. Yeah.
Imagine, forget it is the government. Forget it is the government for a moment. But we'll come back to the government. Imagine an employer has a union representing his workers or its workers. And the union is saying to the employer, we would like to have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And the union is saying it repeatedly, year after year, year after year. And then you have the employer simply saying, we can talk about it next year. We can talk about it 6 months from now. We can talk about it 9 months from now, 4 years from now, 5 years from now. And the workers decide, Doc, that they will go on strike. In that example that I provided there, I believe that in the context there, the workers are entitled to go on strike. The workers are entitled to go on strike. And therefore, I believe that Nandalal's argument takes and removes the context under which the workers would have gone on strike. The workers then decided they're going to bid and stay home today. It is in response to what I believe would be justified circumstances to take industrial action. These are circumstances, though, where the government has failed to allow the entire process of collective bargaining to be given effect to. They have allowed and tried their best to undermine labor. So that becomes back to certain fundamental issues. Must be in this society the role and operation of social justice. There must be social justice. You cannot have a situation, Doc, where any employer decides unilaterally that they will impose wage conditions, they will keep workers working, they will deny them their reasonable dues, and just simply have them working there. That is slavery. It is oppression. And it is dictatorship. So let us put it in that context. You were then telling me as a worker that I have to continue working, that I have to continue accepting the sources of oppression, and I can't stand up and strike. And if I stand up and strike, you take away the limited amount of resources that I'm already asking you to increase.
Yeah.
The proposition of no work, no pay in the current situation must be rejected. It can't be seriously articulated, but it is being seriously articulated. And the fact that it's being seriously articulated, I believe, opens a window into the government's mind, into how they see the society and how they see the working class.
Yeah. Yeah.
This is a party who a few years ago, Doc, would present its credentials as a working class party. This sort of behavior, this sort of decorum is inconsistent fundamentally with the concept of a working class party. You know, Doc, as I've been unable to find any specific legislation governing strikes in Guyana. You know that, Doc?
No, I'm shocked.
But I was shocked also, Doc. I was shocked. But I try to process it not as a lawyer, but as a student of history.
Right.
Why is it that almost 60 years of being independent and many years before, there's no legislation specifically governing strikes? When you could strike, why you can't strike, bip, bop, bop. Why? But as a student of history, Doc, I believe that the reason why it never existed is because, one, the political parties came out of the labor movement.
Yes. Taken for granted.
And not just taken for granted, Doc. I believe that the political parties and the leaders at the time and their orientation towards the working class could not stomach much of what is happening here. There was no need for legislation.
Right.
Strike and when they can't strike. The government, as the Minister of Labor or the Chief Labor Officer, would have had to intervene.
Yeah.
You see how far we've come, Doc? You see how far we've come?
Sisters and brothers, we're getting quite a lot here tonight. Welcome to Politics 101, those of you who are joining us late. It's Roysdale Ford, the Shadow Attorney General, member of the People's National Congress, and a student of the law, a scholar of the law. You know, you have lawyers and then you have scholar lawyers. I think Roysdale has been able to really contextualize a lot for us here. Roysdale, I'm going to ask you to do something basic because I have been asked by a number of teachers. So the court has said that the status quo is in place. The government cannot touch the salaries. They have to continue the check-off system until the matter is resolved. But some teachers are still fearful that despite what the court has said, the government is going to take their money. And they're asking me, Dr. Hines, explain this thing. I, of course, will explain it from the standpoint of a political scientist, a social commentator. I want you to speak to the teacher. And I'm telling you, there are lots of teachers who they've heard the news, it makes sense to them, but given the government that they're dealing with, they are still not sure that this thing is for real. Talk to them for us.
Doc, thank you for that opportunity, because up to this morning, I had the opportunity to speak with a number of teachers who somehow found my number and called me. And they were very concerned and wanting to know what really this order is about. And these were teachers from Region 7, Region 1, Region 9, throughout the length and breadth of the country. And I told each one of them, on the groups of them, that, and I'll say it again, that the order made by Justice Kissoon is a significant order. It is an order in support of your rights. It is not a final order, but it is an important temporary order. And it halts the government in its march to decimate you and your teachers' union. The order prohibits the government from taking any sum of money from your salaries in relation to the days that you would have struck. And I believe, Doc, that, and I must commend Justice Kissoon, because I believe that the fact that he would have made such an order, I believe that roaming and going through his mind and what he cogitated on is what I believe is the fundamental issue here of the balance that you must strike in the circumstances. There will be situations where the teachers' union, when they strike, it might be legitimate for the government to take sums of money out of their salaries. But have a regard to the circumstances as a whole here, where you have been going for 3 years. You have tried to utilize every meaningful process. You try to have conciliation. You try to have arbitration. You try to stay on the side of the law. Walk in the narrow corner. Don't jump in the traffic. Stay in the corner. And you're still there suffering a socio and economic burden which you believe is not legitimate. You believe that you are not fetching a fair burden as the rest of the society have a regard to the allocation of resources. So I believe that that is a significant order. So it empowers you in the circumstances to stand up in support of yourselves and to act in accordance with the demands that your union would have articulated. So I see that order as an order that strengthens at this stage the current circumstances of the teachers, their vigorous articulation of their positions, and their ability to continue their strike. The other part of the order, I believe, dealt with the government's ability to suspend the deduction of dues, and the court, at the same time, I believe, adopted probably the same approach, in which the court is saying that that is a sign of the government acting in an oppressive manner, which would ultimately affect the ability of the union to elongate and to continue this strike towards the resolution of it in a fair and equitable manner in favor of the society as a whole. So I believe that those are very important orders. I believe that they are orders which would allow you as a union, as members of a union, as persons aggrieved, to continue to stand up for what you feel you deserve.
What you feel you deserve. Roysdale Ford here tonight, really laying it out for us. Earlier, Mr. Ford, you made reference to the Kenyan Constitution. I am somewhat familiar with that Constitution. What I didn't know is that, comparatively speaking, it is one of the most advanced constitutions. I teach a comparative ethnic course, and I usually do any combination of Guyana, Trinidad and Tobago, Fiji, Kenya, South Africa, and Nigeria. And of course, I do it from a political science standpoint. And I am aware that Kenya has had to grapple with its ethnic problems. Only, I think it was, I can't remember the year now, but it might have been 15, 20 years ago after the election, there were serious disturbances, which then led to a power sharing government, led to constitutional reform, and so forth. So I'm making the point that in the process of addressing and confronting its ethnic problems, the Kenyan constitution itself has been upgraded, so that constitutional reform and ethnic problems go hand in hand. And I think that is perhaps a lesson for us in Guyana, because unlike in Kenya, and to some extent Zimbabwe, confronted the same issue with post-election ethnic violence. They had a power-sharing government there. I don't know constitutionally how far they have gone. I know South Africa post-apartheid has had some constitutional adjustment, but I'm making the point here that there's a relationship between constitutional reform / change and ethnic problems. And I am advancing the point here that perhaps that's something that Guyana could look at. That's countries like Kenya and South Africa to see how they have dealt with the ethnic problems and how constitutional reform have been part of it. Can you comment on that, please?
I definitely, Doc, because one of the significant challenges that the Kenyan society faced at the time was how the rival predominant ethnic tribes, to put it that way, could coexist in a society, in a nation. And I believe that they did, and they put their hands and their minds to create a document which lives. It sort of balances the potential sources of problems in any society, much less an ethnically plagued society, is the allocation of resources and a governmental system, a constitutional system that allows for the devolution of powers and allow those devolved counties or states to have access to resources in a direct draw that was not hindering developments. Because you would have found, Doc, you would know that in the different counties of Kenya, there are also ethnic enclaves. So
Yes.
certain tribes live in certain areas. So the development of that system, sorry, was supposed to address those issues, those insecurity issues, the inability of central government to deny resources, as we see happening in our country, in our republic, where the central government allocates the resources in a manner that does not reflect the spread of the people, the needs of the people, and the demands on each community or each geographic region, as we have it here. So these are very important issues. I believe, and I am seeing more and more, Doc, in my opinion, respectfully, that what we have happening as strikes and so on flow from these sort of structural problems, these systemic issues which we have not resolved. And the growing wealth of the country is aggravating rather than being a cooling balm of consolation on the issues that are plaguing us.
On the issues that are plaguing us. Of course, if we look at the political history of Kenya, we'll see some similarities there. You know, Kenyatta and Odinga, were both in the same political party representing the two large tribes, the Kikuyus and the Luos. And then they broke into two different parties, and we see their sons emerging as the leaders of those two parties, Uhuru Kenyatta and Raisa Odinga. Right, and that they had to deal with the problems that their fathers confronted and left unresolved, because you had that long year where you had a long period of dictatorship in Kenya. Kenya, of course, was one of the best economies in Africa, but you had a long period of dictatorship, and then we came out of that, and Kenya has confronted its ethnic demons. It's not the perfect, but they have gone a long way. And as we go into constitutional reform, I think there's some things that we can learn from the Kenya experience. Roysdale, is there anything that you particularly want to talk about that I haven't touched on? We'll have to come back and deal with constitutional reform in a separate program. We've touched on some of it tonight and so forth. But is there anything you want to talk to our audience here about that I didn't ask?
Yes, Doc. I want to talk about the recent decision by the Chief Justice in the Winston Jordan matter.
Ah, yes. Go ahead.
No, Doc. The Chief Justice, in her decision, I believe, put an end in any sensible country um, to the perpetuation of charges of malfeasance against Mr. Jordan. Um, After this matter would have been determined, as far as we knew, it was determined in the magistrate's court, we thought that the matter was at an end until the Office of the Chief Justice sent us an email indicating that she had delivered a decision in this matter. It is disturbing, Doc, that the government, through the DPP and her instrumentalities, would continue seeking to um, hound Mr. Jordan down. I believe the decision of the Chief Justice indicated quite clearly, Doc, that there's absolutely no basis for any of these charges. But nevertheless, the government continued. And I'm very disturbed that the Chief Justice had to be brought upon to make such a decision. It questions the criminal justice system, that the DPP could seek to do this in an ex parte trial without seeking to have Mr. Jordan heard. You saw the Chief Justice reject that. But I'm happy for that rejection. But what concerns me is what would have gone into the processes beyond pure rank, dirty politics in this manner. Um, I think that it is an embarrassment. The decision exposes the DPP's office to ridicule. There's absolutely no evidence as found by the Chief Justice. Absolute. In relation to any of these charges, and the government continues to do it. That is it in the context of a criminal prosecution. In relation to civil proceedings, it was tossed out of the High Court. But they continue to, again, going after Mr. Jordan. And I believe that the reason why I wanted to refer to this, because I believe that it is similar to what is happening with the teachers union. I believe that there's differences in terms, obviously, teachers union and so on, but I believe what underlies this process here is a certain arrogance and a certain proclivity for rash and oppressive decisions by this executive.
By rash decisions by the executive. Uh, Roysdale, we are coming up to another election. They're saying that it's going to be next year, but there is still unfinished business in the courts regarding elections petition from 2020. Where those cases are at the moment, and not only the elections petition, but also the charges that were brought against functionaries of GCOM and some members of, or at least one member of, the People's National Congress.
Again, Doc, it is the mind frame of the government. I see no basis upon which these charges could actually be continued. They're 3 to 4 years old. The government seems not to be in a position to bring any evidence. And I don't believe that they're really interested in having these issues determined by the judicial system. This is part of the process of putting pressure on the opposition, part of the process of painting people into different colors that they want them to be. You charge the chief elections officer, you charge Ms. Lawrence, you charge other persons, other functionaries of the whole party, and the elections commission as a whole, and up to now, not one single charge would have been brought. But certainly, Doc, I would challenge the Attorney General or the DPP to indicate the bill, the legal bill, that would have been charged by the lawyers representing these persons. It would be in the tune of millions of dollars. So this is just another opportunity to fleece the state of money. Because there have been no output, no meaningful progress in any of the charges. Absolutely none of them.
The petitions?
The petitions are at an end because of the decisions made by the Court of Appeal. We have not proceeded in those circumstances to the CCJ. But the issues, Doc, remain live. The issues remain live as we approach a new round of elections. It indicates the management of the elections, the entire process that would have gone into these electoral processes. I believe the question of a recount And the use of the recount will continue to plague this nation for a very long time to come. I've indicated it over and over again, Doc. I don't want to be the voice crying out in the wilderness, but on this issue, I believe it's my responsibility. It may happen 10, 15, 20 years from now, but the fact that we had a recount, it was permitted, I believe, largely by trickery. It cemented and approved gross acts of fraud in that election. It has allowed a number of things to come out of the box, which cannot be put back in and will never be put back in.
And will never be put back in. Something tells me that our next election, we will face that same crisis that the court has not resolved in any serious way, or the National Assembly has not resolved in any serious way. We are living in serious time. Yes, go ahead.
Doc, when you contemplate what would have happened in the elections, right? And we had a very strange situation. The elections obviously is the electorate determining the result of the election by their votes, right? That is an election. What we had, in my respectful opinion, is a process whereby by machinations, by certain positions being advanced and adopted, where ultimately the maneuvering and the result of that election was made largely by 4 persons. 4 persons of a member body. And I'm talking about the Guyana Elections Commission. So any majority, Doc, could have determined the outcome of that election in any manner that it wanted it to go. And having regard to what actually happened and what came out in the documents, it really came down in many instances to really one person, the chairman of the Elections Commission.
Yes.
So we have a system whereby the nation could vote, and we could call by a majority of 7 persons to have a recount.
Yep.
And what happens after there is anyone's guess. And that is what I'm saying and speaking about now, and the danger of that system, which is now an appendage to our electoral system, and what trouble and harm it could cause.
Roysdale Ford, those of you who remember the 2000 election in the United States of America, came down to one justice. One justice. After all the votes, one justice. After all the votes in Guyana, one justice in her capacity as chairman of GCOM. Roysdale, my brother, it's always a pleasure to have you on. You really shed so much light here tonight, clarify quite a lot for us. And please come back soon. I know you're a busy man and so on, and I don't like to call on you too often, but clearly when I do call on you, you answer the call, and the information and analysis that you bring are invaluable. Thanks so much. Any closing thoughts as you go?
Doc, just whenever I'm invited, I'm always happy to come on your show. I believe it is part of my duty, not just simply as a politician, but more as a lawyer, to bring my understanding, my analysis to bear, to elucidate the issues and to assist in the education, which I believe is so necessary as we stand up against this oppressive regime.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Roysdale. Roysdale Ford there, senior counselor and shadow attorney general, laying it out for us. Thank you all so much again for coming out in your numbers tonight and for staying with us. We continue to do our work because this work is important. We are doing education, public mobilization, and of course, in our partisan way, we're also doing some partisan work. So it's really a combination of emphasis here on this program, and I rather suspect similar programs. We are indebted to you in the audience, because without you, there is no program. There's no program. We thank Attorney at Law, Senior Counselor Roysdale Ford, for coming through tonight. Tomorrow night, I'm trying to remember who I have on tomorrow night, but we are going to be here tomorrow night, same time, 7 o'clock, 7 o'clock Guyana time, and we are going to be on. Thank you so much, and I will see you all tomorrow night.